No, it's great. It's great. Hey, Curt Mercadante, so glad to have you on today. It's really exciting to have you on.
Crispin, thank you so much. And I always love those intros. So
I know.
So entertaining. I get lost in the intro.
Right. Well, welcome to the Pipe Podcast. I'm your host, Crispin Cruz. We're going to be talking about the Pipe, which stands for Process, Initiatives, Prospecting, and Experiences as it pertains to sales. So I'm sure you have a couple things to talk about there, Curt, as well. And, I'd like to just jump right into it if you're okay with that.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Yeah. So tell our viewers and our listeners, what part of the world you run, what do you do? What's happening in Curt's world right now?
Yeah. Well, I'm a CEO. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur over the years. I've founded and I've built 3 profitable businesses. My current business is Freedom Rising Enterprises. In addition to being a contract CEO, I also coach executive men, driven men, to help them dissolve the limiting beliefs and tension and stress and anxiety and really separation consciousness that keeps them from living their lives of flow, of fulfillment, and of freedom. And I'm coming to you today bright and early here in Sedona, Arizona. In 2020, as the world was filled with chaos, we decided to surf the chaos. And we took our 4 kids. We sold our home, just about everything we owned. We were living on the water in Charleston, South Carolina. We traveled the country. We had no real intention of where we were going. And we ended up about a year and a half ago here in Sedona and said, we like this. Is pretty cool here. Let's stay. So Here we are.
Well, I follow you, closely. And it always looks like, you're on vacation. I mean, it just looks like, I'm like, he's just on a permanent, vacation. I mean, and experiencing life. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, we talk about creating the life of freedom and fulfillment that you want, right?
Yeah.
Creating the life of freedom and fulfillment that you want. Can you share a little bit and let's explore that with the listeners and the viewers as well?
Yeah. Henry David Thoreau once wrote that the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, and that desperation is discontent. And in my book, 5 Pillars of the Freedom Lifestyle, I actually write that quiet desperation is more dangerous than loud desperation. Why? Because when that desperation, that discontent gets loud, most people, they make a change in some way, shape, or form, right? There's studies that show actually being ignored in a job is worse than just having an outright toxic boss, because an outright toxic boss, many cases, you'll want to react by leaving the job. But when things are quiet, when it's that quiet discontent, I've worked with a lot of men who can put up with that quiet discontent for years and decades. It's just low level of stress that kills you fast or slow. So you say, well, I can deal with that. I had a decent day on Monday. So you rationalize it. Well, I had a decent day on Monday. Forget the last 20. Maybe I can make this work. And next thing you know, you're 40, you're 45, you're 55. And then you're like, you know what? I just got to run out the clock. I'm going to retire at 65. I only have 15 years left. So forget it. I'm just going to run out the clock. And that's why a lot of people use this term work-life balance, and it's complete BS. It's a total myth. And when people hear me say that, they think it's because I'm one of these hustle and grind gurus who say, no, don't blur the lines between work and life. Just go all at it. No, I come at it from a different angle. There's not work and life. There's just life. Why are we separating it out? When we separate it out, we get in trouble. We look at life as some seesaw. Well, I'm going to put it all in work for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to focus on this project. I'm going to ignore my wife. I'm going to ignore my kids. I'm going to ignore my self-care. But when it's all over in 2 weeks, then I'll start paying attention. Maybe I'll eat a salad, go for a walk, take my wife on a date. If that happens, and it's a big F, and I say this as someone who's been there, you just go back to it. And that 2 weeks turns into 6 months, turns into when I'm 65, and just in my family. And this is before whatever we want to call the last 3 years. Now we have family that are sick, ill, dropping, Before 3 years ago, people in my family, heart attack, stroke, knee replacement, right? At like 64 to 67. So all those years you spent waiting, right? And then in 2020, this is what happens. I see all these people. The lockdowns happen. You can't fly overseas. And people say, I'm a victim of COVID. I was going to take this trip to Australia. It was my bucket list trip. You're not a victim of COVID. You're a victim of waiting. You should have taken that trip years ago. Oh, Curt, I can't afford it. Well, life is about choices. Life is about priorities. What about that $1,500 LCD flat screen you bought 15 years ago? What about that new car? I once had a guy who said, well, I can't afford coaching. I'm miserable, but I just bought, he made about 40 grand a year. I have this car payment on my new BMW. And this is a true story. I'm going to Vegas with my buddies this week, and that's going to cost a lot of money. Life's about priorities, right? Every coach I know has a story about someone who says, I'd really hire you, but I have this new purchase to make. And we find solace in stuff, and then we try to wait until we're 65 or whatever that magic date is. I remember I hit 40 and I was in my 30s, right? And I'm Superman and I'm miserable and I had anxiety attacks so bad. I remember one time the light was off in my bedroom and I was rocking back and forth on the bed, and I told my wife, get the kids out of the house. I just couldn't stand to hear their voice. They weren't doing anything bad. And I tried to numb myself with pharmaceuticals that were prescribed by a doctor, and I numbed myself. Well, finally I got to 40 and an interesting thing happened. I spent my life working toward 59 and a half when I could finally take my IRA money out, right? I got to 40 and all of a sudden I could see 59 and a half around the corner. And I'm like, I got to hang on to this for another 19 and a half years. It just ain't worth it. I'm not being a good dad, a good husband. By the way, I'm fat, drunk, and stupid. When I say drunk, on these pharmaceuticals because I'm having anxiety attacks. So I had a drug for my stomach. I had a drug for my cholesterol. I had a drug for this. I had a drug for that. I said, I'm not doing this for 19 and a half years. And I decided to stop. And so that leads us to where we are today.
Yeah. And what, when you say you decided to stop, how did that come around, Curt? I mean, did you just was it one of those stories where, hey, I've been smoking for 20 years, so I decided just to go cold turkey and just stop? Or was that a process? I mean, talk to our listeners about that.
Yeah, it's always a process for the most part. It's a series of triggers that lead up to it. My dad was a 4-pack a day smoker. And then my mom said, well, Curt's going to be born. You have to leave the house. If you're still smoking when he's born, you can't live here. Now, my dad quit cold turkey. I know other people who struggle, but there was triggers and that brought it along, right? My dad died in 2012. And I remember sitting in the wake and I went there and my dad worked on the space program. He built fighter jets, like technology in fighter jets. My brother told me my dad was instrumental in building like technology on the first shoulder fire missile, like all these things, right? That he did. And not one person at his wake mentioned anything about my dad's career. It was about, he was president of the local University of Notre Dame club. He volunteered to read audiobooks for the blind. He did all this stuff, and that's what people talked about. Now, I remember my dad up until, the mid 80s, he was a president of all these companies and he lost his job. He was in his mid 50s and he reinvented himself as an entrepreneur. And when he reinvented himself as an entrepreneur, all of a sudden, magically, he was at all my games. He would come to my games. He would come to my cross country meets, all this stuff. And I saw that shift. Up until then, he ignored just about everything. He ignored a lot of things in his family. And so when he passed away and I saw that and I asked myself, who the hell would even come to my wake if I died? Like some of my clients? Probably not. They might send some flowers. Like, what's it all about? And I went back and I remember telling my wife, I said, I'm sitting here, I'm anxious. All I can do is I'm sitting in my dad's wake and I think about what I'm missing at work, And I went back and I made some massive change, right? Nope. I just went back to normal. Why? Because I was making a ton of money. And so it took another 5 years until that pressure got so much that I remember a Tuesday morning, I woke up, it was supposed to be Thanksgiving morning, or it was Thanksgiving week. I was supposed to be on vacation. And I had told all my clients, all my team, I'm out. I'm taking the week off finally. This is it. But that didn't stop them. Join this conference call, send us this report. Now, I know some of you might be, well, just suck it up, Curt. Just suck it up. Well, I had sucked it up for a long time, right? I had some $300,000 months. I was hustling. I was grinding. I was making money. And people who want to lecture me have no idea what they're talking about. The people who know what I'm talking about know that when you're done, you're done. And on that Tuesday morning, I woke up and I said, if my plane goes down on the way to this god-awful 8-hour planning meeting in DC next week, or on the way back, is this where I want my life to be if that plane goes down? And the answer was no. And I woke up and I fired every single one of my clients that day. And people are like, well, why didn't you get it ready to sell? Well, if I hadn't been in denial for years, I would have gotten it ready to sell a few years earlier. But I was done. I wasn't getting another conference call. That was it. I was done. And I let them go. And it was the best thing I did, especially because you know what happened a few years later? Over that time, I shut it down and I built up my coaching company. I wanted to help people. I wanted to help people be fulfilled. I wanted to help driven men avoid what I was going through, or people who were going through what I was going through. And by the way, this doesn't mean work is bad. It means that you finally look at your life as 3 slices of a pizza pie. Yeah, there's work, but there's self-care and there's relationships. It's not balance. You've got to align all 3. With all due respect to some people who say, well, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you got to give it all up. You got to threaten your marriage. Hey, life's choices. If that's for you, go for it. Absolutely go for it. But if you're someone, I see Lisa Turnbull writes, why just men? It's not just men, but I'm a man. I speak from my own experience. I've coached women as well. The interesting thing is there's a lot of coaches, a lot of therapists, a lot of people who work with women. There's not a lot who work with men. And if you look at the statistics, more women, for instance, suffer from depression and anxiety than men. But women get help at a higher rate. Men don't. Pre-COVID, 7 in 10 suicides in the United States. 7 in 10. We hear about the young people and we hear about celebrities. 7 in 10 were white men, 45 to 54. And I don't say that because I think people should feel sorry for white men. I say that because wait, these are the privileged people. What the hell are they killing themselves for, right?
Right. That's right.
And they have money, they have the car, they have the suburbs. They're in the house in the suburbs. They're living the life they were told to live, but they're living the life that someone else told them to live. And they wake up at 40 or 45 and they say, what the hell am I doing? Can I live a life that I actually want to live? Or am I just working for my car payment, for a car that just gets me to and from work, just like the Prius next door or the Honda next door, right? Whatever it is. And so it's the problem is we separate people into certain groups. I mean, we do this in everything, right? Everything's separate, right? And that goes for a lot of things. Black, white, and this and that, and privileged and unprivileged. And so you get to 45 and you have anxiety. And then you feel guilty. Why do you feel guilty? Well, because I have this nice house. I'm doing what I was supposed to do. I feel guilty. They're telling me I'm privileged. So I don't get help because men are taught, be like John Wayne. You don't talk about your emotions. You don't talk about your feelings.
Or if you're hurt, you don't talk about your injury. You don't talk about
that. Okay. And if you want to be like John Wayne, that's great. He died a bitter, sick man who cheated on every spouse he ever had and had multiple forms of cancer. Yeah. If that's for you, but go at it. Life's about choices. I'd rather not do that. And I know there's a lot of men who would not rather do that. And it's not about choosing something over money. We just stop separating everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I do. And that's why I help the people I help.
That's great. Let's shift gears for a second.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about your book. What inspired you to write it? Let's talk a little bit about when the reader gets to the last few pages, what are the 2 or 3 things that you're hoping that they take away?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. The first part of my book is taken directly from podcast interviews I did with people who were either in throes of helping other people find freedom and fulfillment, or people who had hit, I don't want to say rock bottom, but hit that point in their lives where they knew they had to make a change. And I in my book, I read about something called infrastructure rattling event. And that's like my dad died. And so it was an infrastructure rattling event. But some people have a stroke, a heart attack, a divorce. It's that infrastructure rattling event. And a lot of people get that event and it forces them to change. A lot of people go through it and they don't. But I talked to a guy, I won't name his name. He's in the Pacific Northwest, and we had talked on LinkedIn. He was maybe talked about, and he kind of disappeared for a while, and he came back. He's not in my book, but this tells the story of what the book is about. And he called me. We hadn't talked for years, and I was watching college football, and he texted me. He's in finance up in the Pacific Northwest, and I said, how you doing? He said, better than ever. I said, really? What happened? He said, I had the widowmaker 2 months ago. Open heart surgery. And I said, really? Why are you better than ever? He said, because it finally shook me out of that state where I was, where it was only about work and I was ignoring my family and my health. And it shifted me around. That's what my book is about. The second half shares 5 pillars you can use to help you live that life of freedom and fulfillment. The first pillar is superpowers. Get in. At the time I wrote the book, I was a strengths finder coach, Clifton Strengths, Gallup. Now I use the DISC model of human behavior. It's much simpler. But identify those inherent strengths and behaviors that help you achieve whatever you want, but you do it in the way that works for you. I don't need your strengths, Crispin. You don't need mine. You'd work with what you have. The second pillar is vision. Do you have a clear vision for your life? Not like a goal, not a BHAG. A vision is like, here's how I want to live my life, not 20 years in the future, but right now. Here's how I want to live my life, Number 3 is alignment. It's not balance, like we talked about, work-life balance. It's aligning those 3 facets of your life in a way that works for you. Number 4 is outcomes. So I often tell people, everyone likes to talk about the big, hairy, audacious goal, and you wake up and you set it for the year, and yes. Well, if you sign up to run a marathon, you've never run a marathon before, right? And you get up on day 1, and all that you're thinking about is 26.2 miles. You're more likely to go back to bed. Right?
Yes.
Like 26.2. Right. You forget about it because, okay, you sign up for the race, you do it, but then you sign up for a good program where when I wake up this morning, all I got to worry about is that half-mile walk run. That's all I got to worry about. I work with some sales. I've worked with some sales folks. I had a sale guy. This was in June, and I had a mindfulness program that teaches you to wake up and just silence in the morning and meditate and get that silence. Well, he was in office technology sales. He was a rock star. He was crushing it. Number 1 at his company. They sold. He didn't like the management, so he switched to basically, I think it was a competitor. They sold basically the same thing, and all of a sudden he couldn't sell. Well, what's the difference? It's basically the same product. He didn't lose his skills. His new job had monthly sales quotas. Well, for him, the monthly sales quota paralyzed him. He would wake up thinking about that sales quota, and oh my gosh, it affected everything. He put on a bunch of weight. He was snapping with his family. He couldn't sell. He was never hitting his quota. Previously, he was number 1 in his company. So we had this mindfulness program, right? It just starts with waking up for 5 minutes in the morning. As soon as you pee, right? Once you get over 40, it's like, all right, you got to get up and pee, right? Yeah,
It's like the 3rd time by that time.
Right. You pee the 3rd time since like 4 a.m. You get up and you just sit in silence. You don't make your coffee. Don't pray. Trust me, if you pray, prayers will be more effective after you do this silence, right? And you just sit in silence with no noise, no nothing, no tasks. By the way, don't use an alarm clock to wake up. It's dangerous for your health. You're waking up in stress right away. Anyways, we started that and more mindfulness. We did breathing techniques, and about 20 days into it, this is last June, I said, how's it going for you? He said, oh my gosh. He said, first of all, he said, I don't even know how this happened. Just being more mindful, I had to buy new jeans. I lost so much weight. He started living intentionally in the moment instead of just like, you blindly go into the kitchen and stuff your face and then walk on. Or in the middle of the day, if he started being more intentional, like, I'm going to pack a lunch instead of just going to the Quick Mart. He drove around. He was on the road a lot selling, He said, also, it's 20 days in. I've already blown away my monthly quota without thinking about it. And I'm number 1 in my region. Had nothing to do with skill. Maybe he needed to work on his skills. It had to do with up here and allowing the noise to clear out. So every day, he wasn't thinking about that monthly goal. He just had some clear outcomes. Listen, I'm going to eat better today. That's one outcome I have. I'm going to get up and I'm going to meditate today. So it's leading an outcomes-focused life, but not outcomes like some people think, where I'm just focused on that BHAG all day, right? And the thing is And I think I'm going to write a book about just this fifth pillar. To me, it's the key pillar, but it's the cumulative effect of the other four, which is flow. Living life in flow. We all wake up. Oh my gosh, we watch social media and you got to wake up and fight. You got to hustle. You got to grind. You got to wake up and you got to go to war. Working out is a war. Hell, meditating is a war. Every form of self-care, everything you do is a war. And then you wonder why you grind through life instead of flow. Well, what if you looked at that workout as self-love? What if you looked at your sales calls as self-love instead of, I'm going to pump myself up to go on these sales calls? What if you looked at it as self-love for yourself and love for someone else? Unless you're selling an evil product, right? What if you look at these things as self-love and then you flow into it rather than getting your adrenaline and your cortisol up and I'm going to war? You do that day after day after day. And then it's like, what am I doing? I'm so worn out. Right? You can flow through life and be much more effective, much more effective. You could be a lot more prosperous if you stop worrying about being prosperous. Right? It sounds counterintuitive, but some of the best salespeople I know are the least stressed. They're the happiest. Why? Because they don't wake up saying, I'm going to go crush it today. They have a smile on their face and they're calling, and they got up and they do their self-care. They got up and they have their routine, but it's not grinding through routine. It's flowing through it. So those are the 5 pillars. And that's why I wrote it, to help people get in that state, really, in the end, get in that state of flow. And a lot of it's subtraction, getting rid of the blockages in your life that are blocking the flow of the stream, right? And so we like to add. And then we say, I don't have time for this. Yeah, it's a sales arbiter, right? I don't have time for my sales calls. Well, what else are you doing? You want me to make 20 calls a day? Yeah, I do that in an hour. Unless I get a lot of people answering the phone, in which case it's good. Oh, I can't do. Well, what else are you doing? What else you got going on today? And you start looking and living intentionally. And it's not like you have to fight to subtract things from your life. When you're intentional and you pay attention to things and you start managing it or you start measuring it, you start looking and like, oh, wow, I have no more excuses.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. So good. Wow. It's so good. Listen, okay, so we're going to announce this today. You're writing that book on flow.
Okay, there you go.
All right, because that's too good. And that's what, just when you were talking about it, Curt, that's what it brings it completely full circle for me. When you talked about the other 4 pillars and then flow, and that brings it, full circle for me. So I'm really, it all kidding aside, I'm hoping you do write that book, because it's going to be one of my first purchases for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, you got a deal.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. So let's talk about there's a lot going on in the business world right now. You talked about some triggers and stress and how some C-level associates, as well as CEOs or even entrepreneurs, and how they're not balancing, not managing, their life in a better way. So what do you think, what does a entrepreneur really need to do this year? What are the 3 things they should be focusing on, to really be successful, maybe to grow, themselves and to grow their business? What advice would you have for those listeners out there?
The number one, the flippant answer is turn off the news. But kind of stepping back, Chat GPT, right? And AI is getting a lot of press lately. And when you look at it, people talk it as if it's its own entity, right? But when you look at AI and Chat GPT, it's incredibly similar to your own brain, namely your subconscious. From the time you were born, your subconscious is sucking in everything around you. It's like having an Alexa, or, you ever have that conversation. I'm looking for my cell phone. You ever have a conversation about something? My wife and I, we got a new dog. We had a conversation. We were sitting on the couch talking about what my dog ate. And 10 minutes later, all I'm seeing is Instagram ads for dog food, right? Well, it's downloading everything around it in its environment. Guess what? Your subconscious is doing the same thing. If you're sitting there and you're 7 years old and you're watching Star Wars and you're consciously focused on Leia and Luke but your parents are in the other room having an argument about money, and your dad says something like, the rich just get richer and the poor get poorer. Crispin, I may ask you, you don't remember that at all. You were focused on Star Wars, but guess what? Your subconscious downloaded it. I had a client who has 2 TV screens. He's got the news on all day. And he's like, I'm not paying attention to it. Well, consciously, you may not. Your subconscious is downloading it. Well, it's similar to AI. You watch ChatGPT, and some people are like, well, I asked ChatGPT to write me a nice poem about Biden, and it did. But then I asked him about Trump, and it didn't, right? And then people try it. It's different things. Well, here's the deal. AI isn't a person. AI relies on the inputs. It's garbage in, garbage out. Guess what? We are all the same way. We download all of that programming. And I see people who spend their days looking at LinkedIn. What's Crispin doing? What's Jimmy doing? What's Johnny doing? What's Jane doing? And I got to be like that. And they change every single day. And then they say, oh my gosh, I watched this economic report. Oh my gosh, everything's dying. By the way, Dan Jordan, who we obviously both know, right? Yeah, he said something. I don't know if it was him or a client said something about the economy. What about the economy? And I love this line. Dan said to the person, are you selling to people or are you selling to the economy? Right? We get so caught up. Mike Weinberg, great sales professional, he was writing, and this was back in the fall, how everything was so good. Oh my gosh, he's getting these speaking gigs. He's going around. He's like, almost overnight, people were like, what? We're cutting our budgets? What happened? FDR, I'm not a big fan of FDR, but he said, all we have to fear is fear itself. It's absolutely true. You see this emotional contagion that spreads, and it spreads quicker than ever because of social media, because of the news. Turn off the news. There are some people who just can't handle looking at LinkedIn. Or you see this programming like we talked before. Oh my gosh, all these men, I see them all the time. They share this quote, F your feelings. Okay, again, if you want to die like John Wayne, go ahead. If you want to grind your way through life, go ahead. F your feelings. Or maybe pay attention to your feelings and realize, listen, I'm stressed out. Why am I waking up unhappy and discontented and snapping at my family? Maybe I should pay attention to that instead of ignoring it. And all of this affects your sales. If you wake up and you're in a scarcity mindset and a fearful mindset, you communicate energy to other people. You don't think that's going to come through to the person you're selling to? Larry Levine calls it commission breath. You don't think when you get on the phone with someone, you're going to say something that sounds a little more desperate, right? Or let's say your cortisol and your adrenaline goes up because you just watched something on the news and I'm so angry. Now I'm going to go sell. Now your adrenaline's up here and something happens, or you have a crisis happening in business. Well, when your adrenaline and your cortisol up, guess what happens? You're dumber. You're dumber because it's a survival mechanism. Back in the day, if you're in the savannah or wherever and a lion jumps out, your body, your being does not want you to sit there and say, that's a cute lion. But I wonder what the background, what do you think that lion's motivation is? Maybe I should have a discussion with that lion. No, it's all systems are get the hell out of there. Or curl up in the fetal position. Well, now in our day and age, we're not getting chased by lions. We don't live in caves. We don't have to worry about these things. We have air conditioning. We have heat. You and I can talk. We're across the country. We can talk in real time. We have light. We have all these things. And yes, we're more stressed out than before. And that stress makes us dumber and makes us less effective as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as husbands, as wives, as parents, whatever it is. But a lot of people want to ignore that stuff in terms of being successful. And they just want another book. My podcast currently is on hold. So I've hosted a podcast. I've written a book. I'm on your podcast, right? But some people just need to stop listening to podcasts. They just need to stop reading more books and just flow forward. Start doing some stuff. But I've had some clients who all they do is they reinvent themselves every day because they watch this podcast and they watch that podcast. Or they look at the surface. I always use Victor Antonio as an example. Well, I look at Victor Antonio and I'm going to sell, but I don't want to sell. And I don't want to do calls. I'm just going to be like Victor Antonio, who said he doesn't do any outbound calls, but he just does YouTube videos. He's been doing that for 20 years.
Yeah, he's got a little jump on
it. So turn off the news, turn off social media. If you use social media I use scheduling software to post social media. Oh, but Curt, you're not engaging. I got other stuff to do. I get in there every once in a while and engage, but it's not on my phone. I took it off my phone. But don't you want to build your business? Sure. But I don't want to build it at the expense of other things. And when it comes to building a business, in the time it took you to get because you saw some LinkedIn video, now I'm going to do some whiz bang something or other, and I'm going to send this other app and send someone a video, and oh my gosh, the sales. And the time you did that to one prospect, I've called 6 people. Why? Because I'm just flowing, man. I just call those 6 people, I leave voicemails, and I move on. And you're like, well, but I saw this thing and I read a book and you got to do that. Okay, do that. And I'm just,
So good. It's so good. I love it. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening next. What's happening next for Curt? What's going on, through the rest of this year? You've got some exciting things happening, so maybe share that with the listeners and viewers as well. Where do you go next, Curt?
Yeah. Well, physically, we're here in Sedona for a while. We love it here. It's quiet. The energy here is wonderful. And like you said, it's like living on vacation. This afternoon, I have some calls and I'm going to go out on the trails and hike. Work-wise, my one-on-one Freedom Rising men's coaching is going, full bore. And I have some men I'm working with who are, and it's funny to say I work with men and women jump in and say, don't you want to work with women? It's like, were you on the cusp of hiring me? Then let's talk. Okay. But that, it's branding 101. I've selected that. It's nothing against women. There are people working with women, right? So, doing my one-on-one coaching, what you see on the screen, by the way, if you go to curtmercadante.com, I have a free Freedom Lifestyle audio course where with my annoying voice, I lead you through, just like a podcast, the 5 pillars of the Freedom Lifestyle. So if you go to curtmercadante.com, you find it there. It's free. We have our Freedom Circle men's group where just about once a week, we bring in a new guest on various facets of freedom. Tomorrow we're doing a breathwork session. We've done sales. We've had Bob Bergen in the group. We've had, talking about being a go-giver, but we've done sales, health and wellness, branding, productivity, priority and time management, those types of things. So that's going full steam. And also I'm a contract CEO as well. I go in and I really try to help when there's an old Hermetic saying called as above, so below. It's called the law of correspondence. And you look in the physical realm or the spiritual realm, right? You look at the solar system and it looks the same. If you get down to the atomic structure, it all looks the same, right? So this notion is everything is like, it's like the little Kachina doll or whatever. You open it and or the little Russian doll, you open it and there's a little doll in it. That's what life is like. That's what the entire universe is like. Well, it's like that also when it comes to business. And so all these concepts we talk about in flow also apply to a business. So I'll go into a business and I'll say, where are the blockages preventing the flow? And, that's not to say there's not some people who need to toughen up, right? In our society, there is, but it's not all hustle and grind. So we look at the flow, we make things flow better. And so right now I'm a contract CEO for a great innovative company called Advantage Informatics. So we help news publishers, organizations, businesses. We provide them with quality, affordable, reliable content. And so we're working on that. It's about 20 years old, the company, and I was around at its inception. So I'm working with that. So anywhere that I feel that I can have an impact and really help people. And, someone asked me recently, what would you change in your book? What's one thing that you would change? And without hesitation, I said, I use the word fight in my book a lot. When you asked about how did this happen and how did you decide, it's a journey. And I quit that one day, but 5 years later, I'm in a much different place than I was even a year or two ago. And some of that was the stuff that happened over the last 3 years, just really having an awakening of seeing how the universe really works. Right. And so I said I would change the word. I would cross out anywhere I use the word fight in my book, and I would replace it with a love. And that goes to flow. And there's a Chinese concept called wu wei. It's actually spelled like wu wei. And it's flow. It's effortless action. And it's not trying to fight everything. It's not separating everything into good and evil. Right. It's like I was watching Norm Macdonald, the late comedian. I was watching one of his comedy specials. And he said, actually, it was Ricky Gervais. I watched a couple of comedy specials. And he said, all these people say, what would you do if you had a time machine? Well, I would go back and I would kill Hitler. And he starts asking me, he's like, okay, got it. That means you and your grandparents and your children probably wouldn't have never been born. But we separate everything good, evil, black, white. Right. This, that, right? Yeah. And because of that, we have the society we live in now. There's a big environmental disaster. Everyone starts discovering it. And it turns into, well, it's Trump's fault, Biden's fault. It's your fault. It's my fault. Are you vaxxed? Are you unvaxxed? Are you this? Are you that? That keeps us stressed out and it keeps us from flowing forward. And I always ask people, when you get in that realm, when you see something that makes you, and by the way, for years, I had a PR firm. That was my agency. I worked in DC. I was a flack for big pharma and big food. So anyone who ever tells me you don't know what you're talking about, okay, come in. I'll tell you about some of the meetings I was in, right?
Right.
But when you are in a state of fight and flight and separation and me versus you and them versus them, who profits? It ain't you. When you're in a state of fear, you can be a better customer to some people, right? That's not a great way to sell.
That's right.
You got to live with yourself. Yeah. But some people sell that way.
Yeah.
And some people who make a lot of money, by the way, here on social media.
Sure.
Sell with fear. Okay. I just don't. If that's the way you want to go through life, then sell with fear.
Exactly.
So
that's right. I love it. Hey, we're going to shift gears for a second. So this is the time that we typically move over to the Sales Arbiter 7. And this is a tribute to our friend James Lipton. And you may have seen this on other podcasts that I do. So we go through 7 questions and, they're just, it's really, Curt, all the stuff that we talked about today is really interesting. But this is the reason why people actually come on, and watch the podcast, because they want to know all these little things about you that maybe they never knew about before. So I make a joke about it, but it actually has become wildly popular. So I'd like you to participate in this and see.
Let's
how it
do
goes.
it. You got to put on. You got to do the James Lipton voice, and I don't know if you ever seen Will Ferrell.
Remember his little glasses? I just used to love those. So good. So let's start. So what is your favorite word, Curt? What's your favorite word?
My favorite word is probably cultivate.
Cultivate. I love it.
It's kind of that middle ground between create and allow. Right? It shows you that everything's already within you. You just cultivate it. I don't have to go and find it. Nothing's outside of me. My freedom is already inside of me. I just have to cultivate it. I don't have to go out and get it.
Great. Love it. Love it. What is your least favorite word?
Can't.
Can't.
Robert Kiyosaki, wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And Poor Dad was his dad, who was a bureaucrat. And he said, Dad, I want to learn about money. He goes, I don't know anything about money. I'm a bureaucrat. Go ask Johnny's dad, whatever his friend. And Johnny's dad invested in hotels and was and taught him about money. And he said, here's a new rule. Whenever you look at something and say, instead of saying, I can't afford that, ask yourself, how can I afford that? The first is can't, and it shuts it off. It's a no, period. The second question begs a creative response.
Yeah.
What are some ways that I can get this done? Steve Jobs would do this, and they called it his reality distortion field. You'd say, how can we get this done? How can we get this done? And he had people who originally said can't. They didn't last long. And others who said, well, yeah, we can figure this out and blah, blah, blah. Oh, you want a mini computer that fits in your hand out to ship in 2007? Well, let's figure out how to do that. And they shipped. Right? So replace can't with how can I?
So good. It's so good. That's great. What's something that could make your day, Curt?
Something that could make my day is just, a smile on the face of my kids or my wife. 100%. That's the most important. First thing in the morning when I see them, We just got a new puppy. He does it too. This morning I got up and he ran, and all he wants is love. It's just unconditional love, no matter what. I could have done something else. Norm Macdonald, this was a joke he told. He said, "Do you realize that Hitler once had a dog, and there's our dog. That dog actually looked with Hitler with unconditional love."
Oh my goodness.
So
That's
yeah,
good.
yeah.
That is so good. I love it, Oliver. All right. And what's something that could ruin your day?
Something that can ruin my day is really, this sounds a bit esoteric, but when my vibrational energy goes down and I can just feel it, and I start spiraling into, all of a sudden the word can't comes into my head, or I start thinking too much about how's this going to, oh my gosh, I start stressing about a week or two from now.
Yeah.
And so what I've learned to do, whereas before I used to, oh my gosh, I'm anxious, I got to take an anxiety drip, right? I go and I stop everything I'm doing. I hit the pause button, and I'll go and I'll sit and I'll meditate. And I'll meditate until I have a fan over me. And my friend Jason Greger, who's a philosopher, said it's like, when the fan's going real fast, even when you turn it off, it takes a while to wind down.
Right.
I sit down and I wait, and I don't fight the thoughts in my head. Oh my gosh, I got this to-do list and I got this, blah, 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 right? I bring it back to my breath, and I let the other things dissolve. I don't fight them. I don't judge them. I say, okay, I'm having that thought. Okay, just not right now. Not right now. I'm focused on my breath. And once I get to focus on my breath, all right, I'm back. It's just like hitting a pattern in a rep. The toughest thing though, the number one toughest thing that I ask my clients to do, I could ask them to get up in the morning and go run 10 miles. That would be easier than what I'm about to, I'm going to tell you I asked them to do. I asked them to get up, 5 minutes of silence in the morning. It's the toughest thing, because on minute 2, they're like, this is a waste of time. I got to check my email. I got to do things. I got to make the coffee. Now I'm wasting time because I watched this video that said, you got to get up. Oh my gosh. And I watched this Robin Sharma video that said, you got to get up at 4 a.m. So I got to get up at 4 a.m., but I'm up at 4 a.m. and I'm not checking my email. I'm meditating. This is wasting time. That's the society we've built.
Yeah.
And so just getting up in that silence, but doing it in the middle of the day when you just need that, you just got to let the fans and you're more effective that way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Okay. And what sound or noise do you love?
Laughter. I love laughter, and it talk about that vibrational energy. It just raises you up no matter where you are, and there was a video that I saw over the weekend, and it's sad if you're there, right? But it was of a funeral, and they were carrying the casket, and all of a sudden the casket broke and the body came out and rolled down the hill. And I showed my kids and I said, if that happens at my funeral, please laugh. Please laugh. I said, by the way, if it happens at your mom's funeral, don't laugh. And don't tell her ever, do not laugh. If it happens at mine, please laugh, because why? Nothing really matters.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you and I are going to end up at our bodies are going to end up at the same place. What happens after that, we can have a discussion on. But it's like we're so worried about the next email and the next this. And then, oh my gosh, the next election is the most important election in history. This meeting you're about to have is the most important meeting I've ever had. None of it matters. The things you worry about today, you probably won't even care about in 3 days. So, life's too short not to laugh. So that's the sound I absolutely love.
That's great. So going on the flip side of that, what sound or noise do you hate?
The first thing that comes to mind is alarm clock. I can't stand it. I tell people if your body, if you are in the right state and you're doing things correctly, your body will never need an alarm clock. So, first of all, did you go to bed at a decent time, or did you buy into the stuff you see on social media that you don't need sleep? Arnold Schwarzenegger said you only need 2 to 3 hours of sleep. Whatever. Okay. Right. But so if you get enough sleep, which takes being intentional again about when you go to sleep, or did you sit there and doom scroll on social media, or did you watch Netflix for a while? Most people don't do anything good after night. They just stare at a screen. And then you wonder why you can't get up or you're stressed. The other thing I do is and I teach people this, get in touch with your subconscious. It's 95% of your cognition, 95%. And before I go to bed, I ask my subconscious, wake me up at a time. Well, if I have to get up for something, wake me up this morning, right? We're 2 hours ahead. I want to get up at 5:30 so I can make some coffee and be here. And I said, wake me up at least by 5:30. 5:25, my eyes flew open. When you get in touch with your body, with your mind, everything, you don't need an alarm clock, but an alarm clock wakes you up first thing in the morning with cortisol. It's adrenaline. Boom, out of sleep. If you're in a deep sleep, all of a sudden, and that's how you start your day.
Right.
And that's the way you are probably until you go to sleep. Start your day with silence. You can get up and work out and everything, but start your day with silence. And you don't need that alarm clock. An alarm clock, if you need an alarm clock, it's because you're not intentional about when you went to bed or what you ate before you went to bed, right? And all those things. It's funny how that alarm clock and that one thing can transform your life. Because it makes you be intentional about the choices you made leading up to going to bed, and what you're going to do right after you wake up in the morning.
Oh, so good. It's so good. All right. Last one. What profession other than your own would you have liked to attempt?
Yeah. There's, it's funny. There's two answers that come to mind when you say that. Number one is, I would have been a Buddhist monk or something, right? But I love my family, so I with my family or something like that. I don't know, just I don't know how that would look. Maybe like Doctor Strange, something like that in camouflage. Which, by the way, in May I'm supposed to go up to Nepal on a spiritual retreat to different temples, which is going to be fun. The other thing that I think of is, but I'm going to say this, but I'm already living it. I was going to say teacher. And teacher because I feel like our schooling system is completely broken. Now, we homeschool our kids, so I actually am a teacher.
Right.
But just in terms of, and maybe teachers wrong because teachers, I know, they've sapped the creativity out of the profession. Right. And so now it's bureaucrats deciding it. So maybe I'd be the czar who redoes schools. But I guess, again, it doesn't really matter. Everyone's reinventing themselves now with micropods and things over the last 3 years. If there is a silver lining, people reinvent it, schooling and education. But I think when we go back to the subconscious and AI and programming, I think our kids today are being programmed with such harmful messages. I'm not talking about the political stuff, but just about, there's a reason businesses like Apple and Google and tech don't want kids who went through traditional education anymore because they got to re-educate them anyways.
Right.
So I guess I am a teacher. So that wish became true.
That's great. All right, Curt, how do people get in touch with you? How do they find you? If they need help on some of the things that we talked about today in this podcast, what's the best way?
Yeah. So come on over to LinkedIn, Curt Mercadante. You can also, if you're a man who wants access to my Freedom Lifestyle audio course. And by the way, if you're a woman, you're going to get help from it as well. You can text the keyword Freeman, FREEMAN, to the number 55678. So all you got to do is take out your smartphone, text the word Freeman to 55678. You will magically get a link in response from me. And you click on that link. There's a host of items there, but it also, you have access to my Freedom Lifestyle audio course. And there's links to everything else. It's easier than spelling Curt Mercadante. So
There we go. I love it. Curt, I can't thank you enough for being on today. It's been really educational. And I know that, our listeners and viewers have just gotten a ton of information and golden nuggets out of this podcast. So thanks so much for being on. I hope you'll come back again, after you write that book on flow.
Yes, absolutely. Well, now I
want us to do the book release. We can do the book release together. So that
absolutely.
would be great.
You got a deal. And Crispin, it has been my pleasure coming on. I know we booked this a while ago.
Yeah.
I'm like, when is that? So thank you so much. I appreciate it for having me on the show.
All right. And I always like to close with this. Listen, keep selling and have fun doing it. Thank you so much, Curt.
Thanks, Crispin.
Alrighty.